My son tried to have me declared legally incompetent, telling a judge I was dangerously forgetful. I sat there and quietly agreed my memory has its lapses. He has no idea that for the past year, my forgetfulness was the perfect cover to document his embezzlement. Before we dive into this intense story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. We'd also love to know where you're all tuning in from. Let us know in the comments. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, a day already gray with a steady, dispiriting drizzle. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one with the worn leather that had molded perfectly to my frame over 2 decades, nursing a cup of tea and trying to soothe the dull ache in my joints. At 58, I was learning that the body keeps a meticulous record of every youthful folly, every heavy lift, and every long hour spent on a construction site. I had built Miller and Son custom homes from a bag of tools and a second-hand pickup truck into the most respected building firm in the county. Now, in what were supposed to be my golden years of semi-retirement, my reward was a chorus of creaks and groans every time I stood up. The envelope was stiff, formal, and bore the letterhead of a downtown law firm I didn't recognize. My own lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, was a friend of 30 years. Her correspondence came in friendly, cream-colored envelopes, not this sterile, intimidating white. My hands, calloused and thick from a lifetime of labor, trembled slightly as I slid a finger under the flap. The tremor wasn't from the chill in the air. It was a deep, primal thrum of foreboding. The words inside were a blizzard of legalese, cold and impersonal. Petition to appoint a conservator. In the matter of Peter Miller. Incapacity. Inability to manage financial affairs or personal care. I had to read the document 3 times before the meaning could penetrate the fog of disbelief. My son, my Daniel, was petitioning a court to declare me legally incompetent. The tea in my stomach turned to acid. The warmth I'd been cherishing fled my body, replaced by an arctic cold that started in my chest and spread to the tips of my fingers. The petition was attached to a signed declaration from Daniel. His own words, typed neatly on the page, were the cruelest blows. He cited my increasingly erratic behavior. He mentioned my dangerous lapses in memory, recounting an incident where I'd forgotten the name of a subcontractor we'd used for years. He described me as a danger to himself and his own financial security. Each sentence was a perfectly aimed dagger. He had twisted my quiet moments of reflection into evidence of senility. My deliberate withdrawal from the day-to-day grind of the business wasn't a well-earned retirement. It was proof I could no longer function. The son I had taught to ride a bike, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the young man to whom I had proudly handed the keys to the company, was now trying to put me in a legal cage. I lowered the papers onto my lap, the crisp edges feeling impossibly sharp. Outside, the rain intensified, streaking down the window panes like tears. I thought of Daniel's face, so much like his mother's, and how it had recently taken on a new hardness, a gloss of impatience I had chosen to ignore. I had chalked it up to the pressures of his new role as CEO, the ambition I myself had instilled in him. I had made excuses for his curt phone calls, his dismissive attitude whenever I brought up small details about the business. I told myself he was just busy, that he was carving his own path. But this letter wasn't about carving a path. This was about burying the man who had paved it for him. This was a patricide of the soul, a legal maneuver to erase me from my own life. I looked around the room at the photographs on the mantelpiece. Me and Daniel, age 10, holding up a crooked birdhouse we'd built together. Me and him on his college graduation day, his arm slung around my shoulder, both of us beaming with pride. They were relics from a different timeline, artifacts of a love that I now realized was entirely one-sided. The betrayal was a physical weight, pressing down on my lungs, making it hard to breathe. The father in me wanted to weep, but the builder in me, the man who understood foundations and structural integrity, knew that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. A son doesn't do this out of simple concern. This wasn't an act of love. This was an act of war. My first instinct was to pick up the phone and scream at him, to demand an explanation, to unleash the torrent of pain and rage that was roaring in my ears, but I stopped myself. My hand hovered over the receiver, shaking with a fury I hadn't felt in years. What would it accomplish? He had already made his move, a calculated legal strike. A screaming match would only give him more ammunition. See, Your Honor, he's unstable, prone to outbursts. Instead, I took a deep breath, the air shuddering as it entered my lungs. I needed to think. I needed to be strategic. The man who built custom homes from the ground up knew that you never started swinging a hammer without a blueprint. My anger was a wildfire, but I needed it to be a forge, to sharpen my resolve into something hard and useful. I folded the legal documents with painstaking precision and placed them on the table. Then I called him. I forced my voice to be level, tinged not with anger, but with a weary confusion I knew he would expect. "Daniel," I said when he answered. His voice was brisk, detached. "It's Dad." "Hi, Dad, is everything okay?" The feigned innocence was almost impressive. I got a letter, son, from some lawyers." I let a bit of a waver enter my voice. "I'm a little confused. It's talking about my health, about a court." There was a pause on the other end, the kind of polished, rehearsed silence that precedes a prepared speech. "Dad, I know this must be difficult to understand," he began, his tone dripping with a condescending sympathy that made my skin crawl. "This isn't what I wanted, but lately we've all been worried about you. You're forgetting things. You almost signed off on the wrong material shipment last month. You seem so distant." Every word was a lie wrapped in the guise of concern. The wrong material shipment was one I had questioned, because the cost was inflated by nearly 30%, a query he had brushed off with a wave of his hand. My distance was a reaction to his coldness. He was using the very symptoms of the problem he had created as justification for his treachery. "I'm just tired, Daniel," I said, letting my voice sound frail. "Running the business for 40 years takes its toll." "I know, Dad, and that's why I'm doing this," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "It's to protect you, to protect the legacy you built, to let you rest without having to worry about anything. Marcus and we just want to make sure everything is taken care of so you don't have to. Please just trust me." Marcus, the name hung in the air. Julian Croft, Daniel's new best friend and financial advisor. A man with a smile that never reached his eyes and a handshake that felt like a reptile. He had appeared 6 months ago, and since then, Daniel's ambition had curdled into something far more toxic. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that Julian was the architect of this particular blueprint. I see," I mumbled. "I need to think about this." "There's nothing to think about, Dad," Daniel said, his tone hardening slightly, the mask slipping. "The hearing is in a few weeks. It's for the best." After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my house for a long time, the conversation replaying in my mind. He was so confident, so sure of himself. He saw me as a relic, a doddering old man who was an obstacle to his grand plans. He and his slithering friend Marcus thought they had accounted for every variable, every contingency. They had laid the groundwork, manufactured the evidence, and prepared their compassionate, sorrowful speeches for the judge. They believed my mind was failing, my memory turning to dust. But they had forgotten one crucial thing about me. They had forgotten how I built this company. I didn't build it with just my hands, I built it with my mind. I built it on details, on knowing the cost of every nail, the grade of every piece of lumber, the integrity of every single joint. For 40 years, my memory for the specifics of my business was legendary, and I never, ever miss a detail that matters. The foundation of Miller and Son Custom Homes wasn't concrete, it was sacrifice. I laid the first course of that foundation when Daniel was still in diapers. I remember working 16-hour days, coming home covered in sawdust and drywall dust, my muscles screaming in protest. I'd kiss my late wife, Mary, good night, and then sit at the kitchen table until 2 a.m., hunched over invoices and blueprints, a single lamp pushing back the darkness. Every dollar we made went back into the business, or into a college fund for our son. I missed school plays. I missed parent-teacher conferences. I missed lazy Saturday mornings. I traded those moments for the hope of building something permanent, a legacy that would give my son the opportunities I never had. When Mary passed away from cancer, Daniel was only 16. The business was the only thing that kept me from crumbling. I poured my grief into the work, building homes for other families, trying to construct a future for my own. I taught Daniel everything. From the time he was tall enough to see over a workbench, he was by my side. I taught him how to read a blueprint, how to frame a wall, how to treat clients with respect and workers with dignity. I taught him that our name, the Miller name, was our most valuable asset. A Miller home means quality, I'd tell him. It means we don't coup. T-corners ever. He was a quick learner, bright and eager. When he got his business degree, I was the proudest father on earth. Bringing him into the company, first as a project manager and then as my second in command, felt like the culmination of my life's work. When I decided to semi-retire 2 years ago and make him CEO, it wasn't a difficult decision. It was the plan all along. Miller and Son. The first year was fine. Profits were steady and Daniel seemed to be managing the transition well. But then, about a year ago, Julian Croft appeared. Daniel introduced him at a family dinner as a financial genius who was going to help modernize the company's portfolio. Julian was everything I was not. He was slick, dressed in suits that cost more than my first truck, with a watch on his wrist that could have paid for a kitchen remodel. He spoke in a rapid-fire volley of buzzwords, synergy, optimization, leveraging assets, that seemed designed to impress and confuse. He had a way of looking around my home, the one I'd built with my own hands, not with admiration but with cold calculation, as if he were mentally appraising every piece of furniture. He made me deeply uncomfortable. He'd clap me on the shoulder and call me Pops, his smile wide and predatory. "Peter, you built a heck of a machine here," he'd said once, gesturing around the office. "But every machine needs an upgrade. We're talking about next-level expansion. Global markets, maybe. Why build houses when you can build empires?" I tried to warn Daniel. "Son, be careful with that man," I said one evening. "People who promise the world usually just want to take your piece of it." Daniel had laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Dad, you don't understand. Julian gets it. The old way of doing business is dead. It's slow. We have to be aggressive to compete." That was the beginning of the change. Daniel started talking more like Julian. He became impatient with my old-fashioned insistence on triple-checking invoices and maintaining long-term relationships with our suppliers. He called it micromanaging. He started holding meetings I wasn't invited to and signing contracts for new developments I'd never heard of. When I'd ask, he'd give me vague, polished answers that sounded like they were straight from a script written by Julian. The condescension began to creep in, a subtle poison. "Don't worry your head about it, Dad. It's all handled. This is complex financial stuff." He started treating me like a mascot, a figurehead to be tolerated rather than the founder to be respected. The final straw, the one that ignited my suspicion into a certainty, was when I saw the invoice for the flooring on the Henderson project. The price was 30% higher than the quote from our trusted supplier of 20 years. The payment was to a company I'd never heard of, Apex Holdings, LLC. When I brought the invoice to Daniel, he snatched it from my hand. "It's a new vendor," he said curtly. "They gave us a better net 90 payment term. It's strategic." "Better terms don't justify a price like that," I pressed. "It's thousands of dollars over budget. Who are these people?" "Dad, please," he sighed, the picture of exasperation. "I'm the CEO. Let me do my job. You're retired, remember. Go play some golf." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the middle of the office I had built, feeling like a ghost. It was in that moment I knew. He wasn't just being ambitious. He was being foolish, and he was being led by a wolf. The inflated price, the unfamiliar company, it was a classic embezzling scheme. Simple, arrogant, and insulting in its transparency. My son, my own son, was stealing from me, from his mother's memory, from the legacy I had broken my back to give him. and he thought I was too old and too stupid to notice. The day after the phone call with Daniel, the fog of grief and shock began to recede, replaced by the cold, clear light of purpose. He thought he was dealing with a forgetful old man. Fine. I would be the most forgetful old man he had ever met. If my supposed incompetence was to be my shield, then I would wield it with precision. My first call was to Sarah Jenkins. I didn't go to her office. I asked her to meet me at a small coffee shop in the next town over, a place where no one would know us. When she saw the petition, her face, usually so warm and cheerful, hardened into the sharp, focused expression of the formidable lawyer she was. "The nerve," she whispered, her eyes scanning the document. "Peter, this is baseless. We can fight this head-on." "No," I said calmly, surprising even myself. "We're not going to fight it, not yet." She looked at me, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "He thinks I'm losing my mind, Sarah. He and that snake Julian Croft are counting on it. If I come out swinging with lawyers and accusations, they'll just lock everything down and cover their tracks. But if I play the part, if I seem confused, scared and defeated, they'll get careless." A slow understanding dawned on her face, followed by a glimmer of admiration. "You're going to let them walk right into a trap of their own making." "I'm going to build them a beautiful cage," I corrected her, "and hand them the key." That meeting was the turning point. Sarah laid out the legal framework. For my plan to work, I had to gather irrefutable proof, and I had to do it legally. It was a dangerous game. If they discovered what I was doing, they could use it against me, twist it into proof of paranoia and delusion. My first move was to lean into the role. I started forgetting things on purpose. I called Daniel to ask him the same question twice in one day. I showed up at the office and wandered around looking lost, asking a receptionist where my old office was. I could see the pity in the eyes of my longtime employees, and it stung. But I could also see the smug, satisfied glances exchanged between Daniel and Julian. They were buying it completely. My nights became my sanctuary. While the world slept, the forgetful Peter Miller disappeared. I still had my old administrative credentials for the company's server, an oversight they had made in their arrogance. From the quiet of my home study, I logged in. It was like looking at the blueprints of a diseased house. The corruption was everywhere. Apex Holdings LLC, the flooring company, was just the beginning. I found dozens of them. Shell companies set up with P.O. box addresses. Summit Logistics, Pinnacle Contracting. All registered within the last year, all charging exorbitant rates for materials and services, and all being paid without question by my son. I meticulously downloaded every inflated invoice, every forged purchase order, every suspicious wire transfer. I followed the money. Using my own savings, I hired a discreet private investigator, a former financial crimes detective Sarah recommended. He was a quiet, thorough man named Costello. Within a week, he had confirmed my suspicions. The shell companies were all linked to one man, Julian Croft. The money was being funneled from Miller and Son, through these fake vendors, and into offshore accounts in Julian's name. Daniel was getting a hefty kickback, paid out in cash and extravagant gifts, a new sports car, a down payment on a luxury condo. The evidence folder grew thicker each night. It was a methodical, painstaking process. Each document was a brick in the wall of their downfall. I cross-referenced shipping manifests with payments, finding orders for materials that were never delivered. I found consulting fees paid to Julian for market analysis that amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars for reports that were nothing but plagiarized business articles from the internet. The stress was immense. During the day, I was a faltering old man, nodding confusedly as Daniel explained his latest brilliant move. At night, I was a forensic accountant piecing together the anatomy of their greed. The duality was exhausting. Some days, the weight of the betrayal was so heavy I could barely get out of my chair. I was documenting the destruction of my own son. But then I would think of Julian's reptilian smile, of Daniel's cold, dismissive voice on the phone, and the fire in my belly would burn brighter. They hadn't just stolen money. They had tried to steal my dignity, my identity, my life's work. They had forgotten that a master builder always knows where the rot is, and he knows exactly how to tear it out. As the date of the hearing approached, I knew I couldn't just wait for the courtroom. I needed to rattle their confidence, to see if I could drive a wedge between Daniel and his puppet master. My chance came at the annual Miller and Son Company dinner, a tradition I had started decades ago to celebrate our employees and their families. Daniel had, of course, continued it, though he'd moved it from the comfortable local banquet hall to a ridiculously expensive downtown hotel ballroom. It was all part of the new, flashy image he and Julian were cultivating. I arrived looking exactly as they expected me to, slightly disheveled, my tie a little crooked, a look of mild bewilderment on my face. Daniel greeted me at the door with a hug that was purely for show. "Dad, glad you could make it," he said, his voice loud enough for those around us to hear. "We saved you a seat right at the main table." I was seated between Daniel and Julian. Throughout the dinner, I played my part. I fumbled with my silverware. I stared blankly when an old employee came by to say hello, pretending not to remember his name. I watched Julian hold court, regaling the table with stories of his supposed financial triumphs, while Daniel nodded along like a devoted acolyte. The sight of it hardened my resolve. When the dessert plates were cleared, I saw my opening. I leaned forward, a look of dawning, confused recollection on my face. "Daniel," I said, my voice just low. Enough for the table to hear. "A funny thing just occurred to me. My old brain is like a leaky faucet, you know," I chuckled weakly. "I was thinking about that big waterfront project. Wonderful job. But I can't for the life of me remember us ever working with a company called Pinnacle Contracting. Who were they again? Did they do the foundation work?" The name dropped onto the table like a block of ice. I saw Daniel's fork clatter against his plate. His face went pale. Pinnacle Contracting was one of the biggest shell companies, responsible for over $500,000 in fraudulent billing for site prep that our own crews had actually done. A dead silence fell over our end of the table. Daniel's eyes darted nervously to Julian. It was Julian who answered, his voice a little too smooth, a little too quick. "Ah, Pinnacle, yes," he boomed, laughing it off. "A new strategic partner, Peter, top-tier logistics. They handled some very complex preliminary work for us. Very cutting-edge stuff, probably came on board after you stepped back." I kept my gaze fixed on Daniel, ignoring Julian completely. "Is that right, son?" I asked, my voice soft and laced with feigned confusion. Because I seemed to recall old Tom Jenkins' crew doing that clearing. I remember talking to Tom about it myself. He told me it was one of the smoothest jobs he'd done in years. Daniel's composure finally cracked. He couldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at his plate, a flush creeping up his neck. "Dad, you're mistaken," he stammered. "You're getting projects mixed up. It was Pinnacle." "Was it?" I pressed gently. "Funny, my memory must be worse than I thought." It was a small move, but it was a direct hit. I had shown them I knew a name I shouldn't know. I had introduced a crack into their perfect facade. Julian, seeing Daniel flounder, immediately went on the offensive. He leaned toward me, his smile gone, replaced by a cold, menacing glint in his eyes. "Peter," he said, his voice low and threatening, "maybe you should leave the business details to the people who are actually running the business now. Stress isn't good for a man in your condition. It can make you more confused." The threat was unmistakable. He was telling me to back off. He was no longer trying to charm the doddering old man. He was trying to intimidate him. His poorly executed threat, delivered in a room full of my loyal employees, was a fatal error. Several people at the table shifted uncomfortably, having overheard the exchange. They saw the flash of malice in Julian's eyes. They saw my son's guilty silence. I simply nodded slowly, a sad, defeated look on my face. "You're probably right, Julian," I said softly. "I get confused so easily these days." I stood up from the table. I think I need some air. It's been a long night. As I walked away, I didn't look back, but I could feel their eyes on me. I had planted the seed of doubt. I had exposed Julian's true nature, if only for a moment. They thought they were in control, that I was a pawn in their game. But I had just moved my first piece, and I knew with absolute certainty that they had no idea how to counter it. The foundation of their lies was beginning to tremble. The dinner was a turning point. My quiet, confused question had sent a shockwave through Daniel and Julian's confident partnership. They became paranoid, and their paranoia made them sloppy. Costello, my investigator, reported that Julian was making frantic calls to his offshore banks. Daniel, meanwhile, was trying to lock down the company's servers, implementing new security protocols. It was too late. I already had everything I needed. Sarah and I spent the next week consolidating the evidence into an ironclad narrative of felony fraud and embezzlement. The final tally was staggering: nearly $2 million siphoned from the company in just over a year. It was enough to seriously threaten the company's financial health, putting the jobs of the 50 employees who depended on Miller and Son at risk. This wasn't just about my stolen legacy anymore. It was about the families I felt a responsibility to protect. The investigation uncovered something even more sinister. Costello discovered that Julian Croft had a history. He had attached himself to 2 other family-run businesses in other states, both owned by aging founders. In both cases, the story was the same: a charismatic advisor, a manipulated heir, and a company bled dry. One of the founders had lost everything and suffered a fatal heart attack shortly after. Julian was a predator who had refined his methods. I was not his first target, but I was determined to be his last. I knew I had to try to reach Daniel one last time, not just as a strategic move, but as a father. I had to give him one final chance to step away from the cliff's edge. I called and asked him to meet me at the house, alone. He arrived that evening, his face a mask of defensive arrogance. Julian had Arlie coached him. "Dad, if this is about the other night, you really put me in an awkward position," he started before he was even fully in the door. "Sit down, Daniel," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. I pointed to the armchair opposite mine. He sat, looking impatient. I didn't waste time. I slid a single piece of paper across the coffee table between us. It was a copy of a purchase order for a custom millwork package, a massive expense. At the bottom was my signature, or what was supposed to be my signature, authorizing the payment to one of Julian's shell companies. "I didn't sign that, Daniel," I said quietly. He glanced at it and scoffed. "What are you talking about? Of course you did. I was there. You signed it in your office about 6 months ago." "No," I said, my voice firm as granite. "I was in the hospital that week having a minor procedure on my knee. I have the medical records to prove it. That is a forgery, a federal crime." The color drained from his face. For the first time, the polished facade of the powerful CEO crumbled, and I saw a flicker of the scared boy he used to be. He was trapped in a lie, and he knew it. "This is Julian's doing, isn't it?" I asked, my voice softening slightly. "He's been telling you what to do, what to say. He's the one pulling the strings. It's not too late, son. You can stop this. You can walk away from him, and we can deal with this together. We can fix it." I was offering him a lifeline, a way out of the storm he had sailed into. I held my breath, praying he would take it. I saw the struggle in his eyes, a war between greed and conscience, between loyalty to his father and fear of his accomplice. For a moment I thought I had broken through. He looked down at his hands, his jaw working silently. But then his eyes hardened again, the influence of Julian's poison winning the battle. "You're wrong," he said, his voice shaking but defiant. You just don't remember. Your memory is gone, Dad. That's what this is all about. You signed it and you forgot. The hearing will prove it." He stood up, unable to look at me. "I have to go." He practically fled the house, leaving the forged document sitting on the table. That was his answer. He had made his choice. He would stand with the man who was destroying him rather than the father who was trying to save him. The door closed, and with it the last door to a peaceful resolution. My heart ached with a grief so profound it felt like a physical wound, but my path was now clear. The case was built. The trap was set. All that was left was the hearing. The courtroom was a small, suffocating space, paneled in dark wood that seemed to absorb all the light. It smelled of old paper and stale air conditioning. I sat beside Sarah at the defendant's table, dressed in a simple suit that felt a size too big, a deliberate choice to make me look diminished and frail. Across the aisle sat Daniel and Julian Croft, both looking crisp and confident in their expensive suits. Daniel wore a somber expression, the picture of a dutiful son forced into a painful but necessary action. Julian just looked smug. The hearing began. Daniel's lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Peterson, called his first witness, a geriatric psychologist who had met with me once for a single hour-long session arranged by Daniel. The doctor testified that I displayed clear signs of mild to moderate cognitive decline, citing my inability to recall specific recent events and my disorientation regarding my role in my own company. It was a masterful performance of medical jargon, designed to paint me as a confused old man. Then Daniel took the stand. He spoke in a low, sorrowful voice, recounting fabricated stories of my forgetfulness. He told the judge how I had gotten lost driving home from the office, how I had accused him of stealing a watch that was later found on my own nightstand. Each lie was a twisting of the knife, but I kept my expression placid, occasionally nodding as if agreeing with his assessment. I saw Julian give him a subtle, encouraging nod. They thought they were winning. They thought the game was over. Finally, Peterson turned to me. "Mr. Miller," he said, his tone dripping with patronizing sympathy, "do you have anything to say in response to your son's testimony? Do you understand what is happening here?" I looked at the judge, a woman with tired but intelligent eyes. "Your Honor," I began, my voice a little shaky. "My son is a good boy, he's right. My memory, it's not what it used to be. I do forget things. Names, dates, sometimes I get confused. He's just trying to do what's best for me." I saw a triumphant smirk flash across Julian's face. Daniel visibly relaxed. This was it, the final nail in my coffin. The judge looked at me with pity. "Mr. Miller, I appreciate your candor. Based on the testimony, I am inclined to grant the petition." "Your Honor," Sarah's voice cut through the room, calm and clear as a bee. If I may have one moment before you rule." The judge paused, looking at Sarah. "Go on, Ms. Jenkins." Sarah stood and walked slowly toward the judge's bench. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Miller, has been completely honest. His memory for small, day-to-day things has indeed lapsed. It's a natural part of aging, compounded by the stress of his son's recent behavior." She paused, letting the words hang in the air before continuing. "However, there is one area where my client's memory remains absolutely, photographically perfect, and that is in the matter of felony financial crimes being committed against his company." A jolt went through the room. Daniel sat bolt upright. Julian's smirk vanished. "Objection!" Peterson shouted, jumping to his feet. "This is irrelevant. This is a competency hearing, not a financial audit." "On the contrary, Your Honor, it is entirely relevant," Sarah countered smoothly. "It speaks directly to my client's mental state and his ability to manage his affairs. For the past year, Mr. Miller hasn't been forgetful. He has been conducting a meticulous and covert investigation into a conspiracy to defraud Miller and Son Custom Homes of millions of dollars." She placed a thick, bound folder on the edge of the judge's bench. "This is a copy of the evidence he gathered, but it's just a courtesy copy. The original, Your Honor, was delivered to the district attorney's office this morning, where it was reviewed and accepted. They have officially opened a criminal investigation." She looked directly at Daniel and Julian. "The case number is DA 774B21. I'm sure the DA's investigators will be in touch with you gentlemen very shortly." The color drained from Julian's face. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. But it was Daniel's reaction that I will never forget. His head snapped toward me, his eyes wide with a horrifying, dawning comprehension. The whole act, the entire year of my decline, flashed before his eyes. He saw the forgotten names, the confused questions, the aimless wandering through the office for what it was, a perfectly executed trap. The loving concern on his face melted away, replaced by the raw, ugly shock of being outsmarted. He looked at me not as a father, but as an adversary who had just delivered the checkmate. The courtroom devolved into chaos. The judge was banging her gavel, Peterson was shouting objections, but it was all just noise. In the silent space between our two tables, my son and I locked eyes. I gave him a slow, deliberate nod. The game was over. The aftermath of the hearing was swift and brutal. As Sarah had predicted, investigators from the district attorney's office were waiting for Daniel and Julian outside the courthouse. Julian, true to his nature, immediately tried to blame everything on Daniel, claiming he was just a consultant manipulated by a greedy CEO. But the evidence trail, the one I had so carefully mapped, led directly to his offshore accounts and his history of predatory behavior. His betrayal of Daniel was as swift as his manipulation had been. Daniel, faced with the mountain of evidence and Julian's treachery, finally broke. He confessed everything. The full scope of the embezzlement, Julian's role as the mastermind, and his own willing participation. His cooperation earned him a plea deal, but it didn't save him from the consequences. He was sentenced to 2 years in a minimum security prison and ordered to pay full restitution. The luxury condo was sold, the sports car repossessed. His empire, built on lies, crumbled to dust overnight. Julian Croft, denied bail due to being a flight risk and facing a host of federal charges, was looking at a much longer sentence. The company was wounded, but not fatally. The first thing I did was call a meeting with all my employees. I stood before them, not as a frail old man, but as their leader, and I told them the truth. I explained the financial situation, the betrayal, and my plan to make it right. I promised them that not a single job would be lost. We would tighten our belts, we would work harder, but Miller and Son would survive. Seeing the looks of relief and loyalty on their faces was the first moment of real peace I had felt in over a year. I came out of retirement completely, resuming my role as CEO. The work was exhausting, but it was healing. With every project I supervised, every blueprint I reviewed, every handshake with a client, I was reclaiming my life's work. I was washing away the stain of my son's betrayal and restoring the good name I had worked so hard to build. 6 months after the sentencing, I drove to the correctional facility to visit Daniel. I hadn't seen him since the day of the hearing. He was thinner, his face etched with a humility I had never seen in him before. We sat opposite each other in a sterile visitation room, a thick pane of glass between us. For a long time, we just looked at each other. Finally, he picked up the receiver. "Why did you do it, Dad?" he asked, his voice cracking. "The whole act, why not just confront me?" I picked up my own receiver. "Because you wouldn't have listened," I said, the truth of it sitting heavy between us. "I tried to warn you about Julian. I tried to show you the forged signature. You chose to believe the lies. The only way to save the company and to save you from him was to let you walk the path you had chosen right to its very end." Tears welled in his eyes. "He promised me everything," he whispered. "He made it all sound so easy. I was weak and greedy. I'm so sorry, Dad." It was the first time he had said it, the first time he had taken true responsibility. It wasn't a magic cure. It didn't erase the pain or the profound sense of loss. But it was a start. It was a single, solid brick laid on the long, difficult road to rebuilding. "I know, son," I said, a tear tracing a path down my own cheek. "The world is full of men like Julian Croft. They prey on our weaknesses. The best we can do is learn from the fall." I left that day not knowing what the future held for us. Some things, once broken, can never be made perfect again. The trust, The easy love between a father and son was gone. But as I drove away, I felt a sense of quiet vindication. I had faced the greatest betrayal of my life not with rage, but with resolve. I had protected my legacy, my employees, and the honor of my family name. My son had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, he had only succeeded in showing me the strength I still possessed. The forgetful old man was gone, and the builder remained.